Hey, good morning. So today we just want to work through Russell's basic point about names versus descriptions. This is, once you get it, a very simple point. And next time we'll look again at the descriptions article, but we'll look at the metaphysical implications that Russell draws from his point here, what the big philosophical issues are. Today is very simple, very technical. Well, not very technical, it's only technical, if you see what I mean, about the basic point Russell is making. He's drawing a contrast between names and descriptions. So the idea of the contrast is incredibly simple, and I'll just set that out to begin with. So far, we were thinking of the basic problem of language as being to find out how the name connects to the object. We find that out, we've got a start on how language works. And the theories we looked at so far by Frege and by Searle take names like Sally or California, or presumably terms like this or that, and they explain how they work in terms of descriptions. So in these theories, the basic point of connection between language and the world is via descriptions. Right? That's all right? Yep. And that's kind of natural, because you think, well, the tall man who called earlier, or the author of Waverley, these are referring terms, right? So I can explain the behavior of one class of referring terms in terms of another. Follow me very closely here. Actually, I would quite like to take a vote in this point. Names like Sally and California refer to particular things, right? Put your hand up if that sounds right. Terms like this and that refer to particular things. I mean, as I use them in a particular context, yeah. Well, the right answer is yes. And terms like the author of Waverley, or the state capital of California, or the biggest city in France, they refer to particular things. Put up your hand up if you think the answer is yes. Yes? If the answer is no? Okay, Russell's basic point about descriptions is that the right answer here is no, and it's an absolutely compelling answer, as I hope to persuade you today, that descriptions don't actually refer to objects. So the theories we've been looking at, the Frege and Searle, say you've got a sign, you've got the reference, and the sign refers via the sense, which is a cluster of descriptions. And the descriptions are basically what identify particular objects. But Russell's thesis is there's a basic class of names that get tied up to objects, but not by being defined in terms of descriptions. If he can make that out, you see, if he makes that out, he blows up Frege and Searle. We've really got to start again. And at the moment, for all the materials we have to hand so far, we have no idea where to start. Right? If these names are not getting connected to objects by being defined in terms of descriptions, we don't know where to begin. Russell is going to be arguing the basic cases in which language connects to the world are cases where we can forget about any notion of sense. There is just the sign and the reference of the sign, and that's how the term has meaning. That was really the point of what I was saying last time about what I call them, line and squiggle and blur. Remember that if you've got the object, then you've got a sign with meaning. If you don't have the object, then you don't get a sign with meaning. And the way you give meaning to a sign is by hooking it up to an object. But I don't know, one of the pleasures of reading Russell is it's like if you go to an exhibition of 100 Picassos, you think, wow, how wonderful to be able to paint like that. Reading Russell, you just think, how wonderful to be so clever. There's something about it, him just staring at descriptions and realizing they can't possibly be referring terms. It just takes my breath away. So what is a name? What is a contrast between names and descriptions? If you go back to the contrast here between Sally or California and the tall man who called earlier, what's the contrast? Well, names are simple, right? California is just, well, there isn't really any better way to put it. California has parts, but the parts, I mean, the name California has parts, but the parts are letters. The parts aren't themselves symbols. Yes? That's all right? Arnold Schwarzenegger has parts. I mean, the name has parts. But it's not that you're referring to other objects here. Whereas if you take the sign, the capital of France, that sign, the capital of France, has components, and those components are themselves symbols. Yep.
Would you call the word pain a name of the sensation?
Pain a name of a sensation? Yeah, I guess you could call pain a name of a sensation. Why not? Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's any problem with that. No, I don't see any problem with that. Yeah. Here comes pain again. Yeah. My old friend pain. You could do that, yeah. So a simple symbol is one that has no parts, which are symbols. So Russell's example, Scott, is a simple symbol because it has parts, namely separate letters, but those parts are not symbols. That's all right? Yes?
So are you saying that names, simple symbols are purely arbitrary, or?
We're not getting that far. This is really as simple, I mean, as elementary as it seems, you know, what I'm saying. We're not going as far as, I'm sorry, say again what you just said.
That simple symbols have some kind of arbitrary type of meaning?
Well, that's not really his main point here, but I guess the general thing you're saying there, that's true of all language, right? I mean, all language, in some sense, the meanings the signs have are arbitrary. Yeah, but that's not the main point here. The main point is just that you can break down some symbols into other symbols, whereas names you can't break down into other symbols. Yep. Yep. So, you could use the letter A as a symbol. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You certainly could. But look, if you think about his example of a complex symbol, yeah, the author of Waverley, yeah, then the parts here, author and Waverley, for example, they are symbols. Yeah, and the only reason that the whole complex symbol, the author of Waverley, has the meaning it does is that those component symbols have the meanings that they do. Yes? Now, in the case of Scott, you could say, well, I shall use S to refer to the South Pole, C to refer to the North Pole, and O to refer to the equator, right? Sure, you know, try and stop me. You could do that, yeah? But it's not because those parts have those meanings that the whole sign Scott has the meaning it does. That would just be a kind of accident here. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. So, you're right, it needs to be shaded a little bit, this formulation, because the parts might happen to be symbols in other contexts, yeah, but their role as those symbols is not relevant to the fact that this whole sign here has the meaning it does. Yeah. Okay. Whereas there's a contrast here with the author of Waverley. This is really meant to be very elementary, so stop me immediately if okay? Okay. So the puzzle then is, it's a really basic puzzle here that Russell is addressing. If this sign, the author of Waverley, has components that are symbols, and it only has meaning because those components have the symbols, have the meanings that they do, then how does it work? How is the meaning of the whole structure here, the author of Waverley, being generated out of the meanings of the component symbols?
it feels like, for example, like author could refer to something else, and like Waverley refers to something else.
Yeah, that connects to the arbitrariness of the signs, right? But what does author refer to? What kind of symbol is it, author? Is it a referring symbol? The author of all. How do you think? I mean, what are the components, right? I just said it's made of symbols. I don't know, the whole thing only has its meaning because those words, those symbols, have the meanings that they do. But what are those constituent symbols? Right, Russell did this. You can do it too. Russell didn't have any data that are not available to you. Yeah.
The characteristic that an object satisfier would make the symbol or the statement true.
Say that again. I'm just asking which symbols are in that phrase, the author of Waverley. Does it contain names? Does it contain predicates? Does it contain and or? And what's in there? Yeah, okay, but you're right. That is the first part of the answer. But how is author working here? Is author referring to a particular person? Aha. Which person would that be? Okay, but that's what the whole thing is seems to be referring to, right? But this symbol, author, that's a constituent, right? So that's not the whole thing. So what does it refer to, if anything? Okay, that would be to say the symbols, the constituent symbols here, don't have meaning independent of the whole thing. Right, but we'll take Waverley. There were a couple of other questions. Gone away? Okay, yep.
You say it picks out the class of the people that are authors?
The class of all people that are authors. Yeah, that makes it sound like a predicate. You see what I mean? Like if you've got Sally is tall, you get the name part, and you get the predicate part, the is tall part. So that would be to say that the is an author part, that's what we're talking about, is an author. That's the component here, not a referring term. What about Waverley? People don't read Waverley anymore. Is Waverley a referring term or a description, or what is it? Is that a term like and? What's Waverley? It's a book, very good. Right. So is the sign, what is the relation of the sign Waverley to the book? Referring, right, so that looks like a referring term anyway, yeah, on the face of it. So you got a referring term here, and it looks like you got a predicate. Yep. So you get the predicate. If you take the author of Waverley, one of the constituents there is an author of Waverley. Yep. That's a predicate. Yes? So that thing is an author of Waverley has two different components. There's the relation, X is an author of Y, and there's the referring term, Waverley. Yes? And there they are. So you can break this down into is an author of and Waverley. Yep. And see, the is an author of relation here, as you can see, is got kind of slots in it, where you can put in names, as you might say, God is an author of the Bible, for example. Well, actually, maybe that's not the best example.
Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn.
Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, perfect, right. Mark Twain is an author of Huckleberry Finn, okay? So you've got a relation here with slots that different names can go through. Yes? Is this whole thing a referring term? Put your hand up if you think this is a referring term. Very good. Actually, this is not a referring term? Excellent. Okay, but Waverley looks like a referring term, so for the moment we'll take it to be a referring term. Okay, so that's the constituents of that complex sign, is an author of and Waverley. So we've got two things to compare, Russell says. A name, which is a simple symbol directly designating an individual, which is his meaning, and having this meaning in its own right, independently of the meanings of all other words. That's okay? Yeah, if I call this line, then that just has its meaning independently of the meanings of all other words. And on the other hand, you get a description which consists of several words whose meanings are already fixed, and from the meanings of those words, those constituents, like is an author of and Waverley, their results, whatever is to be taken as the meaning of the description. Okay. So the question is now, if we've got it that the descriptions are complex and the names are simple, the question is, how are those complex bits and pieces put together in the description? I mean, how are those simple bits and pieces put together to make the complex in the description? I mean, what's the construction here? So suppose you take Russell's example, the author of Waverley was Scotch. Where is the description? That's the description, right? Okay. And what are the components of the description? I mean, what predicates do we have here? We have two predicates. You've got the wrote Waverley part. Someone wrote Waverley, right? The blank wrote Waverley. That's one predicate. And you've got the blank was Scotch predicate. Yes? Making two predicates in all. Yes? Okay. The author of Waverley was Scotch, so we get two predicates, wrote Waverley and was Scotch. So if we just home in on the wrote Waverley one, what is it saying when you say the author of Waverley? If you say the author of Waverley, well, Waverley might not have had an author, right? It might have been that Waverley was produced by a machine, or that Waverley was produced by a committee, right? There might not have been a single author. So if Waverley was produced by a machine, suppose it was you're talking sometime in the future when novels are generally written by computers. Yeah, it's very rare for a novel to have a human author. So tedious to sit down and write a whole novel. Much better to have a machine do it. Yeah. And then someone says, no, there was an author of Waverley. The author of Waverley was Scotch, actually. So if the author of Waverley was true, did someone have to have written Waverley? So if the author of Waverley was Scotch is true, did someone have to have written Waverley? Yes? It couldn't have been done by a machine. Right? There had to be an author. This should be completely obvious. Yes? Is that completely obvious? If you see the author, if I say the chimes of Big Ben, and it turns out Big Ben never chimes, it doesn't have a chime, nothing I say is right. Yeah? You see what I mean?
So the individual would have to assert their feature.
No, I wouldn't put it like that. The way Russell thinks of it, if you say the tallest person in the class, there had to have been at least one person in the class. Yeah? What this requires is that at least one person wrote Waverley. There's a seat right there. So you've got a predicate here, and you've got this term, at least one person. Yes? So this thing at the top is telling you at least one person wrote Waverley. Is at least one person a referring term? Does it refer to any particular object? No, that is not a referring term. You guys have all done logic. What kind of term is this? A quantifier, very good, right? It's not a referring term. Yeah? So it's telling you, you can hit the slot here at least once and get something true. Yeah, there's at least one object of which wrote Waverley is true. So when you say the author of Waverley was Scotch, what you require is that at least one person wrote Waverley. But if you say the author of Waverley was Scotch, could it have been that Waverley had two authors, was co-written? If you say the, that seems to imply uniqueness. Yeah? If we're talking about if some country gets hit by a disaster and we're talking about giving aid to it, and I say, well, the rich country should give aid. You might say, well, there are plenty of rich countries. Yeah? You say the, you suggest unique, that there's no more than one. So that suggests at least one person wrote Waverley, and most one person hits the Waverley slot. Yep. Is there anything here a referring term? Mm-hmm. So when you say the author of Waverley was Scotch, you're implying at least one person wrote Waverley, and most one person wrote Waverley, and where does the was Scotch bit come in? Anything that satisfies the wrote Waverley predicate also satisfies the was Scotch predicate. Right? Yes?
Is it the word that puts the cap on one person writing Waverley?
That's what I'm suggesting.
But
yeah.
why, you could write the authors of Waverley were
You could write the authors of Waverley were Scotch, and we should look at that next time actually, but that's not what it says. Right? It says the author.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting that what Russell's taking it anyway is that requires that there's exactly one. There's no more than one.
But it doesn't in the example of the authors, you're still using the word that. I always suggest using both those things. It's like if there's two authors, still use the word that. And it might mean that at least one person wrote it, but it doesn't mean that at most one person wrote it.
If you use it in the context of authors plural, I think that's right. Yep. But if you and I jointly wrote a book, yeah, and someone came up to me and said, "Ah, you're the author." Yeah, you're the author. I think you might reasonably complain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the use of the author with the singular there, I think suggests that there's no more than one.
Right.
Yeah, but your point is you can use the in the context of a plural. Yeah.
Yeah, like not as a pairing of words, but a singular word like that. You break it down.
As a pairing.
Not like the
Yes.
author together.
Right. Okay. Is part of the deal here that these terms like the are not being given? The term the is not being given its own separate meaning. If you see what I mean, it's only being interpreted in the context of the whole sentence. Yeah. So what you're thinking is completely right. If you had a separable meaning for the, yeah, then what's going on? Yeah. But if you're giving it a meaning only in the context of some particular sentence or another, then this is consistent, I think, with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll come back to this on Wednesday, actually, because it really deserves a lot of discussion, that point. Yep.
Is was Scotch really a predicate? Because isn't there a distinction between the is a predicate and the is an identity?
Yes, there certainly is. This is what Russell says is a great scandal, that the word is used for both identity and predication. Yeah. So I'm taking it that this is the is or was or predication. Yeah. But are you suggesting it might be identity?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, if it was going to be identity, then Scotch would have to be a particular person. Yeah. But is that right? Sorry?
It could be a surname.
It could be a surname, right? Right. It could be a surname. But I take it that Russell is using this as the a vulgar term for the Scottish people. Yeah. So that was Scots, as we'd usually say, is a sort of general term that can apply to many people, yeah, rather than being a term designating just one object. Yeah. All this is absolutely plain as day. Yeah. Okay. So then, if you put this together, this is Russell's theory of descriptions. When you say the author of Waverley was Scotch, what you're saying is at least one person wrote Waverley, and most one person wrote Waverley, and anyone who wrote Waverley was Scotch. That's the whole thing. That just says the same thing as the top. The three sentences there together say the same thing as the top sentence. Now, this is a very simple point, but if it's correct, it actually blows up the Frege-Cell approach to description, to reference, and that's what I want to come on to in a second. But is that completely clear what the analysis is? Yep. Nobody has a smidgen of unclarity about that. Okay. Well, now look at the question, do descriptions refer? Do definite descriptions refer? I mean, I started at the start. I asked you at the start, do definite descriptions refer? And you said, yes, of course they do. Like, if you say the author of Waverley, you're talking about a particular person. If I say the tallest student in the room, we're talking about a particular person. If I say the youngest student in the room, we're talking about a particular person, and then going on to predicate something of them. Yeah? That seems so obvious. The descriptions identify the object we're going to be talking about. The author of Waverley was Scotch. That singles out an object, and then whether the sentence is true or false depends on whether the predicate applies to it. But the trouble is, if you put it like that, that makes it sound like this is a simple symbol that just stands for an object, the author. Yeah? And then the truth or falsity just depends on whether the predicate applies to that object. But these signs are complex. That's what we just worked through so laboriously. These descriptions are complex. They're not just a matter of tagging an object. If the sign, the author of Waverley, was really working like that, then all it's doing is picking out a reference. It's just a tag for a particular object. But these aren't signs like that. These are complex signs whose meanings depend on the meanings of their parts. They're not simple signs that just tag objects. Now, there's a kind of optical illusion here. Suppose you ask, what is it for the name Sally to refer to a particular person? This is what we've been talking about the whole time with semantic value. What is it for the name Sally to refer to the object? So here is Sally, there is the sign Sally. What does that mean, that the name refers to the object? How does it relate to the truth conditions of sentences containing Sally? Containing the name Sally? Anyone? Yep. There has to be a person who exists whose name is Sally. That's certainly true. But what difference does it make to the truth or falsity of a sentence containing the name Sally, that Sally refers to that object? Yes? The predicate has to be true of that object. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. That if you've got a general term, is tall, say, then whether Sally is tall, is true, it has to depend on whether the predicate is tall is true of that particular person. If this doesn't seem plain as day, I'm not explaining it slowly enough. Yes? Is that all right? That's what reference is. That's what we said. So in general, if you've got a whole bunch of sentences, Sally is F, Sally is G, Sally is H, then when Sally is for Sally to be referring to a particular object, then each of these sentences is true or false, depending on whether is F, is G, is H apply to that object. Yeah? The reference of a name has to do with the fact that the name refers to that object is a matter of the whole sentence being true or false, depending on whether the predicate applies to that object. Yep.
So what if I think Sally is fat?
Yes?
We're still talking,
We're still referring to the same Sally. That's true. If you say Sally is fat, is that the way around it was? I want to be very careful here. If you say Sally is fat and I say Sally is skinny, right? Then can we both be right? Yeah, I see your question was, can we still be referring to the same object? I think we could just be disagreeing, right? We might be referring to different objects. That's another possibility. Yeah, you say, no, you don't mean Sally. Right. Yeah, that's a possibility. But I think we could be referring to the same thing and just disagreeing about them. Isn't that right?
Yeah. It isn't true that the name, you find a name being defined as a reference
Yeah.
a virtue of the feeling.
Well, I think I see what you're saying, but it's a little bit more, it's just one step more abstract than what you have there. Whether what you're, when you say, boy, Sally is fat, well, actually, you didn't need to put it with that emphasis. But anyway, right. Suppose you say Sally is fat, right? Then whether that's right depends on how things are with some particular person. Yeah, that's all right? Yeah. And when I say Sally is skinny, whether that's right depends on how things are with some particular person. It can be the same particular person. That's all right? So that's all it takes for us both to be referring to the same thing. Even if it's false, yeah. The fact that it's false depends on how things are with our object. You see what I mean? Yeah. You're right that we tend to interpret each other so as to make each other come out right, if you see what I mean. If I describe Sally to you in ways that seem so far off, you might say to me, no, I don't know who you're talking about, but that's not Sally. Yeah. Or on the other hand, you might say you're mildly delusional. Sally is nothing like that. You see what I mean? There is two different reactions you could have. But it is possible to say false stuff. Yeah? And when you're using referring terms, what makes it false is how things are with the object you refer to. The object you're referring to does not satisfy the predicates you think they satisfy. Yep. Okay. Yes? So, sorry, will you do it?
No.
Okay. So, okay. Russell says a name is a simple symbol directly designating an individual, which is its meaning, and having that meaning in its own right, independently of the meanings of all other words. So first of all, notice that here he's rejecting any kind of description theory. On any kind of description theory, whether it's Frege's or Searle's, the name only has meaning dependently in the descriptions having meaning. Yeah? So he's throwing that out. The sign has its meaning in its own right. You just got the name and the reference. So when you've got a sign like that, that's just got the name and the reference, then you plug in any predicate to it, and whether what you say is true or false depends on how things are with that object, the reference. But now consider this, the author of Waverley was Scotch. What we said was, that's the analysis. These three sentences give the analysis here. On this top line, is there any, so the author of Waverley, who does that refer to? Sir Walter Scott, yes? If that refers to anyone, it refers to Sir Walter Scott. Yes? That's all right? You'll take my word for it? Okay. But in this top line here, at least one person wrote Waverley. Is there any referring expression here? Any expression referring to Sir Walter? No. On this second line, is there any expression referring to Sir Walter? No, there is not. And here's the killer. On this third line, is there any expression referring to Sir Walter? No. So, if you put the three together, is there any expression referring to Sir Walter? No. So this is not a referring term at all. It just isn't a referring term. So descriptions are not referring terms. They belong to a fancier level of language. There's kind of an optical illusion here, which is that when you say the author of Waverley was Scotch, it's true that there is some one object, namely Sir Walter, and whether that whole statement is true or false depends on how things are with this object. Yeah? But that doesn't mean you got reference here. this is a more complicated, fancier phenomenon, that you've got these three sentences, and it's just kind of a coincidence that the way it comes out is that there is just one object here on whose characteristics the truth or falsity of that sentence depends. Yes?
Have we necessarily destroyed the sense or only the possibility that descriptions are?
We've only destroyed the possibility that descriptions characterize sense. That's right, that's a very good point. On the other hand, we have as yet no idea at all how else you might characterize sense if it's not in terms of descriptions. Yeah? Remember, that's what's so difficult about the elusiveness of sense. You can't point to it, you can only point to the objects. Yeah, so you always have to puzzle, what are you talking about? Remember that point, there is no backward road from reference to sense? Yeah, that is really such a puzzling thing. It seems so, if you remember the example of Rumpelstiltskin, you can't get back from the object to the sense, but all you can ever do is show someone Rumpelstiltskin and say, this is who I'm talking about, and you have no way of stopping short at the sense. If the description thing worked, that would give you a way of stopping short at the sense, because here's the description I associate with the sign. But now what we're learning is that can't be right. Yeah, the description doesn't help. The description actually depends on the existence of referring terms. So this looks like reference, right? When you guys said at the start of the class, the term the author of Waverley was Scotch, that looks like reference because you've got this phenomenon, you've got an object such that whether the sentence is true or false depends on the characteristics of that object. But in this case, that's not reference. It's just that you've got these three sentences, and kind of by coincidence in this case, it comes out looking like reference, but it's not reference. Reference is when you have the simple tag referring to the object, and it's because you've got that simple tag referring to the object. If you put it in terms of semantic value, these signs, at least, and wrote Waverley, and most one, and wrote Waverley, these are all predicates with their own semantic values, and the way the whole thing is coming out true or false here depends on this complex construction of all these different semantic values, none of which involves reference. Yep. So that is a simple technical point, right? You get that just by looking at the fact that a description contains lots of different familiar words and its meaning depends on them. And you come out with this devastating thing against both Frege and Searle, it seems to me. They can't be right about descriptions being the foundations of reference, because descriptions don't involve reference at all. They've just been taken in by this optical illusion. Okay, this point has lots of ramifications, which we'll look at on Wednesday. There's a simple one that Russell brings out that I just want to finally look at today. We've got these two pictures, the sign, the description that fixes reference, and the reference of the sign, as opposed to having the sign have meaning just by picking out an object. Now, it's this picture that seems to have been blown up, right? We just blew up this picture. Yes? This is why I take it so slowly, because if this goes forever, then that is really an important point. So if we have this model of how signs have meaning, simple names have meaning, then how can a name have meaning if it doesn't refer? Well, a name can't have meaning if it doesn't refer. Yep. Because the only way the name's getting meaning is by picking out an object. That was the point about blur. There's no object, so there's no meaning. Now, description theories suppose that names which belong to the most primitive level of language are really descriptions which actually belong to a much fancier level of language. And that's a mistake. But Russell's point is, philosophers often, and it's not just philosophers, people generally often make the opposite mistake. They assimilate descriptions to names. So if you take a sign like the Golden Mountain, does that have meaning? Does that mean something when I say the Golden Mountain? I mean, it seems to be perfectly meaningful. Yeah? I mean, why not? To get to the Golden Mountain, you must go through the forests of Mordor. You must, I mean, that makes sense, right? I could tell you a yarn about the Golden Mountain yonder, just past Sacramento. It could happen that simple souls have for generations striven to find the Golden Mountain. It's hard to say it doesn't make sense. Yeah? But does it refer to something? Well, if you say there is no Golden Mountain, that sounds like the right answer. I mean, there is no Golden Mountain. It doesn't refer to anything. But how could it have meaning if it doesn't refer? Like blur. Blur didn't have meaning because it didn't refer. So the Golden Mountain is a simple name, is a referring expression, then the only way it can have meaning is by referring. Yeah, otherwise it would be like blur. So how could the sign have got meaning? There must be something to point out as the Golden Mountain, and that's how the sign gets its significance. Meinong famously said, well, the Golden Mountain must exist, even though it doesn't subsist. When you say there is no Golden Mountain, that's fair enough, but there's a broader realm of objects. There are all those that exist. The sign has meaning because it refers to an existing object. That's a classic theory. In fact, that kind of theory has not gone away. That kind of theory is still alive and well today. But on the face of it, this is kind of wild, right? There's all the regular objects, you and me, and the chairs and the tables and the room and all that. And there are also things like the Golden Mountain, or the round square, or the tallest unicorn, or the King of France. Because if you take all these to be referring symbols, then the only way they can have meaning is by standing for an object. Yeah? And the only way blur can have meaning is by standing for an object. So blur didn't have meaning because it didn't stand for an object. So if these signs do have meanings, there must be things they stand for. Yes?
Doesn't Russell think that these terms introduce a concept?
Concepts, yes, I think that's right. But what is it? How does that help?
Does that, do these signs have meaning in virtues of introducing concepts?
Well, there are different kinds of concepts, right? Referring concepts. If they have meaning by introducing referring concepts, the only way a referring concept like blur could have meaning is by standing for an object. Yeah. So just saying concept doesn't bring us on. Yep. Well, I mean, it's important, but it's not the end of the story. Yeah. Yep.
Is there a difference? I feel like the round square is different from the other two.
I think you're right. Yes, carry on. Why?
Necessarily contradictory.
It is necessarily contradictory.
Not exist even though we can say something.
Yeah, okay. That's the thing. You might say, well, the Golden Mountain, all right, I suppose maybe it is there somewhere. Yeah, the tallest unicorn, maybe it is there somewhere. The round square, wait a minute. Right. But the round square is meaningful. I mean, that sign is meaningful, no?
So,
I mean, let me... Russell isn't going to say any of these things exist. Yeah. His point is, if you don't take his stuff very seriously, you will find yourself saying that they all exist. Yeah. If you make the mistake of not keeping names and descriptions completely apart. Yeah. Okay. But I agree, the round square, you think that's a bit of a stretch, yeah. But it is meaningful because you couldn't even tell it was contradictory unless it was meaningful, right? You see what I mean? It's not like you said a wop bop a loo bop a lop bam boom. You know, it has meaning, even if it doesn't. Yeah.
If Bloomberg is engineering, then that we can derive understanding from.
Exactly, right. So Russell's point is that these are complex symbols, right? If you think of them as names like blur, They only get their meaning by being signed up to an object. Once you realize, no, these have all got predicates inside them. These are signs with quantifiers and predicates inside them. How many terms and predicates, and no reference at all. That's how they're managing to have meaning. Yeah, not by being signed standing for an object. Russell says characteristically, anyone who's willing to babble about the golden mountain or the round square and take it that these things in some sense exist has lost that feeling for reality which ought to be preserved in even the most abstract studies, right? I mean, come on, the golden mountain. So keeping firm the distinction between names and descriptions is what lets you avoid recognizing the golden mountain and so on. But the next question is, Frege and Searle were not just, how should I say, shooting in the dark when they talked about names getting meaning by being associated with descriptions. This puzzle about informative identities was solved by having different names for the same object associated with different descriptions. And Frege also had this thing about a name for an object can have meaning even when it doesn't refer. So what Russell's done here, I mean, I hope everything has seemed extremely simple and compelling so far, but what Russell has brought us to is the point at which we have no way of recognizing the possibility of two different names referring to the same object, and no way of recognizing the possibility of a name having meaning even though it doesn't refer. This is a real puzzle, right? This is kind of like snakes and ladders. We are right back at square one now. We have to rethink this completely if we have to throw away descriptions as our fundamental point of contact between language and reality. Okay, so we'll look again at Russell and descriptions and look at the big metaphysical implications he draws from this on Wednesday. And then on Friday we'll look at Kripke, and with Kripke we really move into the modern world. Okay, thanks.